Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Elisa Lagama, the Met Seal and Michael E. Pulitzer Curator of the Arts of Africa and the curator in charge of the Michael C. Rockefeller Wing. This afternoon's panel is devoted to a layer of content we developed in partnership with the World Monuments Fund to introduce more expansive contextual grounding for the works in the re-envisioned Africa galleries upstairs. It takes the form of a dozen documentaries that are accessible online. And in the galleries, the series is highlighted by short versions of films devoted to Southern African rock art painting, lost wax casting in Benin City, and the medieval architecture of Kilwa off the coast of Tanzania. These are on screens positioned at either end and at the midpoint of our survey of sub-Saharan Africa's visual traditions. In between these, you will see a regular cadence of dedicated labels with QR codes that reference the rest of the films devoted to sites in Liberia, Ghana, Togo, Benin, Uganda, Zimbabwe, and Ethiopia. This program is an opportunity to hear firsthand from the filmmaker Sosena Solomon, along with a number of other key partners to the development of an at once beautiful and edifying series of bridges between the Met's galleries and sites of key historical and cultural significance across Africa. It is a powerful assertion of the endurance of Africa's cultural heritage in situ, thanks to the passionate commitment of local caretakers. Sosena Solomon is currently a lecturer in the Fine Arts Department at the University of Pennsylvania Stuart Weitzman School of Design. Among the short film projects she's worked on as director and cinematographer is Mercato, filmed on location in one of Africa's largest open-air markets and featured internationally as an audio, visual, and sensory installation. Her gifts as a filmmaker were paired with Met curatorial research and advanced logistics by the World Monuments Fund. So also joining us today is Stephen Battle, Regional Director for Africa at the World Monuments Fund. An architect by training, Stephen's 35 years of experience managing conservation projects began in Stone Town, Zanzibar. At WMF, he's led multi-year conservation and planning projects in Ethiopia, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Sierra Leone, Zanzibar, Mali, Ghana, Nigeria, Cameroon, Burkina Faso, Liberia, Benin, Equatorial Guinea, the Maldives, Uganda, Jordan, Lebanon, and Kyrgyzstan. From the outset, he's been a critical partner in developing this initiative, and many of the sites featured in the series have been the focus of projects he and WMF developed with those communities. His careful coordination allowed us to undertake all of the filming over the course of 14 months, which is a miracle. He will be co-moderating today's conversation with Philip Segadika. Philip has been a resident and valued member of the Michael C. Rockefeller Wing team these final months of completing our capital project. In Botswana, he currently serves as the head of the Archaeology and Monuments Division for its national museums. His focus includes the supervision of cultural resource management. Finally, essential to the success of these portraits of cultural landmarks was the generosity of the individuals who shared their deep, multifaceted knowledge with us on location. Many of those advisors have traveled from those distant centers to co-host this reopening, and 3 are on this panel. Faisal Georgis joins us from Addis Ababa University, where he is Associate Professor of Architecture and Chair of Conservation of Urban and Architectural Heritage at the Ethiopian Institute of Architecture. He received his master's degree from Helsinki University of Technology and is the author of Addis Ababa, the City and Its Urban Architectural Heritage, 1886 to 1941. Jonathan Nsubuga joins us from Kampala, where his architecture studio specializes in heritage and cultural projects and has led reconstruction of the tombs of the Buganda kings at Kasubi. He received his training in London at the Architectural Association School of Architecture. Finally, Siaka Mnguni joins us from Cape Town, where he teaches rock art studies, methodologies, curatorship, and archival thinking at the Michaelis School of Fine Art, University of Cape Town. His fieldwork has taken him to the array of major rock art sites across the subcontinent that was the subject of his doctoral degree and of several books he has authored. So, with that background, before turning things over to Stephen and Philip, I want to thank our incredibly generous donors whose names are listed on the plaque in the galleries and in printed materials for many of the events celebrating the Michael C. Rockefeller Wing. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Show the clips.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll show the clips now for the
Sure.
to start off. Yeah. Okay. So well, thank you all for coming today. I mean, it's fabulous to see such a big audience here. Can I just ask, how many people have actually seen these films? Okay, fabulous. Okay, I recognize some of these faces. So I do advise you then to go online. They're now available fully public online, and I think you'll find them very rewarding to look at. So given that most people here have not actually had a chance to see the films, I think we are. Well, first of all, we're going to start with a few clips just introducing each of the panelists, and then I'm actually going to ask them when we start the discussion just to describe in brief terms the sites that they're working on and that they are associated with, just so that you then can sort of start to understand what these places are. So shall we start with the clips then now?
Looking across Southern Africa, there are certain aspects of the rock art that seem to be widespread across the region, but there are certain things that are specific to those particular regions. Certainly, from the manners of depiction, so the ways that people painted these subjects, the symbolism behind rock art is a very important thing to think about. If you go deeper, analyzing all these different minutiae in the art, then you start to realize that there's more to it than just aesthetics.
The spirit world is represented, certainly, in the pictures. The therianthropes, as we call them, half animal, half human, a man with hoofs, for example, or an antelope head. And then there are the transformed figures. This is a baboon shape, but it's got horns, and he's carrying a quiver. There's this constant interweaving of images. So it's really the whole overall message of interwoven associations and meanings that must have struck them. That rock face was probably itself a membrane between this world and the spirit world that lies behind it. These were not just trivial pictures of daily life. These were exceedingly powerful, meaningful pictures.
ስለገለጸለት ይሄን አለቱን በከርሰ ምድር ያለውን ከነበረው የግንባታ ስራ ከተለመደው እንደገና ሰው ከታች ወደ ላይ ነበር የሚሰራ እርሱ ደግሞ ከላይ ወደ ታች በመስራት እነዚህን አብያተ ክርስቲያናት አንጿል።
Lalibela is what we call the climax or the highest point of rock excavation. It's amazing to see the work of such amazing architecture done more than 800 years ago. It's a very religious place. It's a place of pilgrimage. It has a very unique place in the history of Ethiopian architecture, but also the architecture of the world. When you go to Lalibela, you don't see the churches immediately. They are hidden, they are underground. There's also a little bit of darkness. It's not very well lit. There's a lot of mystery. There is no conclusive knowledge on exactly how it was done. We can only make hypotheses. There's a lot of symbolism. If you look at the Beta Georgis Church, the cruciform is reflected in the space. You have the cross outside, and then inside, when you look at the space, it's also in the form of a cross. The topmost windows are open, whereas the lower windows are closed. And this was to symbolize the windows of the ship of Noah. It's also part of the Ethiopian psyche in a way, that these churches reflect the culture. It's not obvious. They don't come out and say, we are here. And when you enter, you start to realize their beauty and mystery.
Muchijawa kavuma mushitake dareri mushitake hili soka chikwata
First of all, I need to explain how the house was designed and built. A typical Muganda house started off with a central pole. Initially, it was laid on the ground, and then they would tie some of the poles around it, and it was erected to give the shape of the roof. So, in Julius Soka, Nebafunachi, Kwatakano, 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 Kwatakano. I call it straight, Akomakati, Zerogatic. Got what? Now, they would use these. These were the nails. They'll bind the house at the top, and then we'll start going down. As I mentioned to you earlier, that the foundation of our houses is up here. So, the typical Ganda house, that was the foundation of it.
So again, thank you all for coming here today. So Philip and I are going to do sort of tag team on this one, and we're going to try and keep it conversational. So it's not a lecture. We're not here to just sort of drone on, giving you lots of facts. So I've asked the panelists to jump in if there's questions they want to pose to each other or things they want to say when somebody else is speaking. Then they have our permission to do that as the panel leaders here. So Siaka, I'm going to start, Philip. If I could start with you. Can you were associated with the film about Tsodilo Hills in Botswana. Can you explain to the audience what Tsodilo Hills is as a site and what its significance is, and maybe something about its history as well?
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Tsodilo Hills is one of the special sites or landscapes that testifies to the age and the deep history of spirituality of Southern African people. It is an example of a place that has power, a place that has strong significance to the people of Botswana and the rest of the region of Southern Africa. In Botswana, the land is relatively flat because it is a sandy desert, and it's only in Tsodilo that you have this series of hillocks, if you like. There's the mother, there's the father, and there's the child. So there are three of them, three main hills. And in those hills, there are rock art sites. And not just rock art sites, but there's also evidence of human occupation going back over 70,000 years. And in the sites themselves, we see symbols that testify to the imaginative and creative capacities of humanity as an expression of people's belief systems, people's worldviews, cosmology, and other aspects of the daily life of the people that lived in that landscape. And so today it is considered a very, very powerful place that even people today would go and draw that power for their concerns today. But this is not a unique part of this place. It is also found in other parts of Southern Africa as well. For example, there's the Matopos in the southwestern part of Zimbabwe. There's the Brandberg in the northwestern part of Namibia. There's the Drakensberg in the southeastern seaboard of South Africa, and the Cederberg Mountains in the western part of South Africa. And there are others as well, but these are the main ones. What is special about this region of Southern Africa is that this is where we find the earliest evidence of expressive culture, artistic representations in these rocks that testify to our species as humans, that separates us from all the other species, because we think in the abstract and we represent our thoughts in forms that you can see visually through painting, through engraving. And Tsodilo Hills is an example of that expressive culture that you don't find anywhere else in the world, in the sense of its age, as well as the diversity of forms that are represented in that art. So it is a special place for us all, for all humanity, for all humanity across the world. I think for now that will serve as a background.
And Siaka, as a rock art expert, there's a time, for instance, when in the film, in the longer version of the film, when David Lewis Williams says that rock art is a membrane, if you like, between this spirit world and this world. Can you explain what that means?
Thank you, Philip. As the study of rock paintings in Southern Africa developed over the years, there was this sort of idea that these were dooglings, these were playthings, art for art's sake, sympathetic magic, a record of daily events. But once people started to look at this art very seriously and applying scientific methods to understand it, people started to realize that there was more to it than just meets the eye. And the way to understand the deeper meaning behind the art was to go to the people that made the art themselves. But in Southern Africa, there are no people painting today. The last evidence that we have of the paintings was about just over 100 years ago. So there were no people to go back to ask specific questions about the art. But nevertheless, there are still hunter-gatherer populations in the Kalahari, Botswana, for example, Namibia, who still tell stories about the past, about their relationship with the landscape. So researchers started to go to them and ask questions about their belief system, their worldview, their thought patterns. And it was then realized that the veil between the present world and the invisible world is very thin. The two in the hunter-gatherer world are very intermeshed. So people would talk about seeing things during the context of the dance at night, things that you wouldn't ordinarily see. And Lewis Williams, who is one of the foremost researchers of rock art research, rock art in Southern Africa, then came to this point that the substrate itself, where these paintings were placed, was alive. And the paintings are suspended in this veil that separates this world and the other world. And that is something that's very special in that particular region, because the rock itself is supposed to be, in the hunter-gatherer context, a living organism. And it is something that animates the art itself. And the rock itself is also placed in context in the environment. And people used to say, well, why don't we see landscape painted in these rock paintings? And then it was found that it is not really necessary to paint these landscape features when the art itself is already in the landscape. So as you enter the cave, you're already looking into a dimension that reflects the landscape behind you. You turn around, you look at the landscape, and you look back again at the paintings, these animals, these people, and all the other things that are reflected in these paintings. They are actually set in context, and the context is the landscape. The sites themselves, the caves, the shelters, are elements of the landscape that are rich with meaning, that are rich with symbolism, that are powerful. So we know that these places were powerful places in the landscape. And the paintings themselves carried that power, and they were imbued with the power of the animals that were drawn in there, because part of the substance of the animal was integrated with the art. For example, the blood, the fat were part of the pigment making process. So the veil is alive in Southern Africa.
So, so thank you for that, Siaka. I think your description of the rock art in the landscape, I think, is very important. And I think that for me, visiting Tsodilo, one of the most remarkable things was coming towards it the first time, because these mountains rear up over the flat plain and they dominate the plain. I believe they're called in, I guess, Afrikaans, Inselbergs, so mountain islands. And it creates a very, very powerful sensation to see them the first time. Jonathan, if I could turn to you next. All right, so you are associated or were included in the film about Kasubi and Wamala tombs in Uganda. So can you tell us about these tombs, describe what they are, what their history is, why they're significant?
Okay, thank you, Stephen and audience. Before I do that, I must first introduce the kingdom of Buganda. It's a kingdom that spans almost 1,000 years old. And the Kasubi tombs, which are Waktu Wamala tombs, are tombs that were built about 150 years ago. And in our culture, each king had a different capital, a capital city on a hill. And when the king passed away, or as we call it, disappeared, they would remove his lower jawbone, and that's where they believed the spirit existed. And they would put that lower jawbone in his palace, which in the end became a mausoleum. Now, Kasubi tombs, the one that caught fire in 2010, is the first tomb which has 4 Kabakas, kings, interred there. And this is the first time when the kings, they didn't remove the jawbone, they buried them, the whole body was buried together. So the significance of that is that the Kabaka who built Kasubi tombs was the first king who dealt with the Europeans when they came to Uganda. And he introduced the openness. He opened up the country, the kingdom, to foreign trade and all that. And his son, Kabaka Mwanga, he is, those of you who might know, he is the Kabaka who is in charge of the Uganda matters, who were killed during his reign. And then his father, Daudi Chua, he's the first king who ruled the kingdom under colonial power. And the last king who was buried in there was Kabaka Mutesa II, who died in 1969 and who was the first president of the Republic of Uganda. So that's why they're so significant. But apart from that, the spirituality of these tombs, the Kasubi tombs is a place which is both, has tangible culture, the building, and then you have the intangible culture, which is more important than the building. And this is what makes that place so important. What you don't see is what is the biggest issue on that site.
And while we're there, something happened on March 16, 2010, to this massive, structure. Can you say what happened and what your role became after that, which happened?
Yeah, and unfortunately, in 2010, March the 16th, the Kasubi tombs structure was gutted by fire, and it destroyed. It's a vegetable building. It was completely destroyed. And my role was to prepare documentation to rebuild it and to convince UNESCO, because it's a UNESCO site, that we actually knew what we were doing to rebuild it. And that was a very important stage, because we had to, when you have to show someone you know what you're going to do, then they'll put the tombs on the UNESCO list in danger. At least you're protected. So that was a very important stage. So from then on, we prepared documentation, drawings. We had to use old photographs taken in the 1890s and all that to start rebuilding the structure. And I think last year, was it 2023, it was removed from the list in danger. That's actually one of the first African sites. And
so I'm going to jump in here. So so just to be clear, these are vast, huge buildings with Kasubi tomb. So I don't know what it is in imperial measurement, but it's 31.
Yeah, the diameter is 31 meters, and the height is about 14, 15 meters
14, 15 meters. It's huge. And they are made of
reeds, poles, timber poles, thatched with grass. They're massive. They're massive. Yeah.
And absolutely, as pieces of architecture, absolutely inspiring structures as well. So when we talked, I can't remember if it comes out in the film, but when we talked on site, you mentioned that the first step you had to go through was to reconstruct knowledge before you could begin the restoration. Can you explain what you meant by that?
I think the Kasubi tombs have influenced a lot of with the narrative within UNESCO. It's the first site you can talk about. You don't say reconstructed. It has been a project to recover heritage. It's been recovering and reclaiming heritage lost. So that means you're dealing with capacity building, because the last time this kind of work was done was 1938, and most of those guys are not with us anymore. So we have to get the younger generation and get some kind of documentation to prepare people to rebuild this massive structure. And the building itself, because when you watch the films, you see that it is woven. It is kind of woven. It's not built, and the complexities and the details are so immense. And to get most of this information, I'm sorry to bring this in, we had to consult the spiritual, the other world, the spirits, the mediums, to direct and guide us in the steps to take and the materials to use. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's fascinating when we talked about it, bringing in the spiritual world. Right, should we turn to Fasil now? Okay, so Fasil, so in the films, you appear in the film about Lalibela, and although I should say Fasil and I have worked together as colleagues for I think it's 15 years, 2010, I believe we started working together in Ethiopia. So I know he's done many, many other things in Lalibela in Ethiopia, but starting first with Lalibela, can you describe the site to us and what its significance and maybe a little bit of its history as well?
Yes. Yes, thank you, Stephen. I'm trying to figure out how to say it in very few words because there is so much to say. Anyway, these are rock-hewn structures which are found in the landscape, meaning are part of the landscape, and until you get very close, you will not see them. You have to see them. When you approach them, you see the churches from top down, meaning you don't see the below. So you have to go through a tunnel and look up and you see these structures. Some of them are seen from the side, on the cliff side. And this is a project by a king, an ambitious king, to create an African Jerusalem. You know, you see, in the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries, and even before, Ethiopia became, of course, Christian. At least the reality became Christian and eventually went down since the 4th century. It's one of the first countries, we are debating with Armenia who was first, but one of the first countries to become Christian in the world. And then in Africa, it was definitely a developing Christian tradition. We have our own Orthodox Church and so on. So pilgrims used to go to Jerusalem. And we still have a chapel in Jerusalem, an Ethiopian chapel. And by the mid-12th century, Jerusalem was taken by Saladin. And it was not easy for Ethiopians to go there on pilgrimage. And the whole trip was arduous. Many people do not return, they die. So this king, in the Chronicles, it says he's gone to the sky, to the heavens, and the Lord showed him a vision to build a new Jerusalem in Africa, in the mountains of Ethiopia. And he took this project very seriously, and he excavated with his, of course, enormous number of people. He excavated and made 11 churches out of rock, out of the natural mountain rock. And this tradition is not new to Ethiopia. Since the 7th century, in the area north of Lalibela, in Tigray, in the region of Tigray, they have been doing rock excavation, which was a sanctuary for monks and hermits and so on, which later on became small churches. I mean, they are not big churches, but they are small churches. So what is special about these rock churches is when you build a building, you bring stone, put stone above stone with either, bind it with mortar or lime. Here, you cut the mountain from top down and you create a block, and then you start to open windows and doors, and then you create space.
Yeah, some people have called that life-sized sculptures.
Exactly. I mean, when you look at them, they are functional churches, but they are also hypogea. They are like a sculpture in real life. So you see that and you see sculpture, but at the same time, it's architecture. It's a fine combination of architecture and art and sculpture. So you go inside and you see this, the walls are carved and painted, but they're not huge. But when you see from above, they look small. When you go down, they look big. So there is also visual impact, which was, I mean, there was a very clever, technique that they used to create this illusion of big or larger size and so on.
So it's not only the churches, it's also a huge trench, because you have to drain the water. You know, you cut the rock and you create a church, and then where does the water go? So they have a network of subterranean structures where the water is drained in the mountain.
So first, I'm going to stop you there. So, each one of our panelists is a nerd about their structures, and so it's like pushing a button, and then they can go on and on and on for hours. So right, but
I'm great for the film,
which is great for the film. So absolutely, and it was great for those of us making the film. So I kind of wanted to come to that next, Susanna. So you know, following on from that. Well, just a reflection that before we started, we most of the time had a pretty clear plan about what we wanted to do, who we wanted to talk to.
Did we?
Yes, we did. So say that we did. But what was clear is that really, you know, on hour 2 of day 1 had to be abandoned, and things happened. And so this question is really about your creative process, because as we went through, we were witnesses to extraordinary things. I'm thinking, for instance, of the Queen at Wamala Tomb, who went into a trance and started talking to or having the words of the former king, who died in the 1850s, by the way, come through her. And I'm also thinking, for instance, of the dancing that happened in the shrines in Ghana. So, in your creative process, how do you knit all of these events into a narrative? Is it something that happened every evening? Is it something that happened when you got back, or is it something that happened in the editing room when when all the films were completed, all the filming was complete?
Well, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be here with everyone that we've interviewed and worked so hard. It's been an incredible collaboration. Creative process, I think it happens simultaneously. So while we're in the field, of course, finding those moments, that Stephen was just speaking of, it sticks out in my mind, and I know to put that in the edit. But it doesn't really, the stories don't come together until the edit room. And so that's when we read all the transcripts, and then I form a script that then goes through our incredible curatorial team. And then we put in the visuals, and it's like creating a puzzle. But definitely all the moments that we experienced in the field are part of that memory bank as I'm editing.
Well, I was always, if I could just say, I was always astonished how you would seem to be able to, something would happen at the beginning of the week, and it'd be an interview, or we'd go someplace and we'd film, and then like day 3, we'd come back to scene 2 in that particular storyline, and it was almost as if you'd had that reel running in your head all the time.
Never stops.
Yeah, I mean, how do you do that? I always wanted to ask you that question. How the hell do you do that?
I just think it's the way my brain works. I mean, as a creative storyteller, what makes this series so incredible is that it's cinematic, and there's a real arc, and we take a journey through very personal testimonies and spiritual stories that you don't normally see. And so I think it's a nice balance that we were able to strike.
And the use of drones, I noticed some of the sites you couldn't, because of their loftiness and stuff like that. Can you say something on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Great Zimbabwe and Soweto Hills, vast amount of landscape and territory. So there was no way I could cover it with my camera. And I had a very tiny camera, which is hard to believe watching some of these images.
It was heavy enough, Susanna. It was heavy enough.
I made him carry everything as we're climbing 8,000 feet barefoot.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the drones were absolutely necessary. And so one of my favorite parts of this initiative is we hired local drone operators who are also filmmakers. And so there was a really beautiful exchange of knowledge as, because they had, obviously we didn't have the authority to fly drones. So we had to work with the local community, but it was just built such a great film community in these places. But we try to use the drones in unconventional ways, I would say that.
And I remember when you were filming in Tsodilo, You had to do the trance dance, the film of the trance dance. And I'm thinking, Siaka, the presence of evidence of trance dance on the paintings, and the fact that there are people today still doing trance dance. Can you say anything about that?
That's one of the points of connection between the rock art and the past. But very interestingly, something that really speaks to the fact that this art doesn't really communicate at a one-on-one level. You have to understand the registers, you have to understand the metaphors and things like that. You don't get to see a lot of paintings of dances in the art. In fact, as far as I know, there's only about 2 sites with what you could actually see as a complete sort of painting of a dance, as well as postures that resonate with the way that the dance is currently choreographed in the Kalahari among the Bushmen that are still alive today. But what is also interesting is that now within these registers, you can start to identify postures and features. For example, one of the most common ones that you find across Southern Africa is what is called the Armsburg posture. It for a long time, it puzzled researchers and said, what does this mean? You had these sort of figures that, if I may demonstrate, so there will be figures in dancing postures, and then arms thrown back like that, as if they're flying. And one of the researchers then went to the Kalahari, and they inquired about that posture. And this healer, who was an old man in his 80s, said, this is actually what we do during the dance to ask God to shoot arrows of Ngum into our spines, so that we get this energy that propels us into the spirit realm. So what happens now in that belief system is that now God is actually watching down, and the people are dancing and are dancing and are dancing, and they keep throwing their hands backwards like that. And then God realizes that that's the one that has the most desire for this energy, for this spiritual potency. And then he will shoot these arrows of potency into their spines. So this potency goes all the way up to the belly. So once it gets to the belly, which is what they call the klabesi, among the Shukwasi people, they call it the klabesi. So once they've danced enough and they've really sort of worked themselves through hyperventilation, this starts to boil. This energy boils in the klabesi, in the pit of the belly, and then it goes back to the spine, and it rises all the way to the top of the head. And when it's boiled enough, then it shoots.
And is that why we are finding some of the rock paintings with certain
lines coming
out of the
that's
head?
Right. So
which, by the way, if you didn't have this ethnographic data, that would just be a mystery. I mean, some of the stuff that is coming from the bleak papers. I mean, people who are imprisoned in the, when was that now? And so, and some of the ethnographic data brought up some of the issues that we are now finding in the rock paintings. I always find that Southern Africa is so fortunate that there's at least this direct connection to the interpretation of the rock art, which you don't find anywhere else really in the world. And yeah.
Well, it's in the film, and so I can't reinforce how powerful that knowledge is, and to see it and to hear it being explained and watching the dancing, how powerful that layer of images are, Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So thanks, Santiago. So one of the interesting things this week in particular, because we've had a group of colleagues here this week who have been associated with the films. So we've had a lot of conversations. So thank you to the Met, particularly for bringing all of these colleagues together. Many of these people, we at World Monuments Fund have worked with at project sites. But one of the things which I think we've reflected on as a group is how pretty much each site has some powerful spiritual aspect to it. And this is, I think, something which is characteristically African. I mean, people are not afraid of the sacred, of the spiritual in Africa. And it's different forms of spirituality, different forms of worship. And I think that's one of the interesting things that comes through the films as well. So Jonathan, turning to you, if I may, at one point, I think it was a conversation that you and I had, you described the tombs as vessels for time travel. Now, what did you mean by that?
I'll be brief on this one out of the takeoff. The structure itself, for outsiders, they're more interested in the building. For us, we're interested in what the building is protecting or showing. The Kasubi tombs is about death. It's about the dead. It's about the other life. And we use those buildings in terms of the intangible culture. We go and we present our issues to the mediums. Each king who has passed away has a medium. It's usually a lady. And you sit down, and after a while, I'll translate it into English. After a while, the king seizes the head of the medium, and the medium starts to speak the way the king spoke. I mean, we've seen this with the recent kings who've died. They speak the same way. They speak it in English or in a past, Arabic, whatever. And you get directed. You get given the message what to do. So I think it is a vessel. The building is a vessel. And time travel comes in where you're dealing with an issue and you're asking, you're consulting, what can I do here? And they first take you back 200 years back, and they talk about a problem that another king did, which was not resolved, which you have to resolve. So you go and do what you have to do. You come back, and then you're directed to get this kind of tree bark, or go and get this kind of I can't talk about it, but to do rituals. And I grew up in the UK. I grew up in Europe, so you can imagine what I've had to deal with, going back and having to do things the way my ancestors did them. Sometimes they looked odd, but in the end, they're the owners of the work I was doing. So to conclude, I think the Kasubi Tombs is a small building that says a lot. And going back to my colleagues, I've picked up in all the films, the spirituality element, the past is what links us, it's what keeps us alive. In my culture, in my tribe, you never die. You're kept alive by fire, you're kept alive by your descendants, and also with activities that rituals have to carry out.
And the kind of heritage that Jonathan deals with is very fragile. It's grass, it's thatch, it's reeds. But case fossil, it's made of stones and rocks, immensely strong. And but yeah, we understand there are still some serious conservation issues. Can you say something on that?
Yes, just one word about religiosity. These places are still alive. They have been used for the last 850 years. People still go there as places of pilgrimage. Sometimes they travel hundreds of kilometers on foot to get there. And then once they get to the area, they remove their shoes out of respect, and they walk on foot to go to the church. So in terms of conservation, these are rocks, but these rocks are actually a little bit fragile when it comes to water. We have seen that water has become one of the main causes of deterioration. And to conserve that, you need very, very, not very advanced, I would say, but very clever techniques and so on. And thanks to the World Monuments Fund, with the different experts, not only from Ethiopia, but also from Zanzibar, England, and so on, we have somehow now started to get a solution. Because for some time, they had to be covered with metal roofs, which was ugly, which was not sightful. In the past, we tried to research and we found out that people from that region, they used to make huge carpets out of wool, oily to be waterproof, and they cover it during rainy season. This we found after research and so. So people cared about them. They cared about them, and they were the symbols of their identity, their religious connection to God and so on.
Thank you. So Senna, following up from what Faisal said, so you're a social documentary maker. Is that a way to describe what you do?
Yes.
Yes, social documentarist.
You should know this by now,
No,
Stephen.
I should. I do. I wanted it in your own words. So again, I'm interested in because we traveled together for a year and a half, visited 12 different sites, and I was intrigued to see how you were able to keep the objective distance from from the places that we were filming in was two things. There was the objective distance and your ability to actually disappear behind the camera as well. I always was in awe of how you could do that. Now, was that harder in Ethiopia? I mean, I know because you're Ethiopian American, did you find that harder in Ethiopia to keep that objective distance, or was that something which was actually that you could draw upon your heritage to enrich the film?
Yeah, thank you for that question. In fact, I think it was easier because my mom here tonight, she was the producer on that shoot, helping me get up at 4 a.m. to make the chanting. So it was, so part of the reason that it was easier, I find, because I was part of, the environment. And I was also, I'm Ethiopian Orthodox, identify as Christian. And so I was also praying as I was filming. And so I think the priest noticed that. And I think people, I was covered from head to toe and I was part of the landscape. And I think that gave me a particular access. So if anything, it was, it enriched it, exactly.
And is there anything as a filmmaker that you think and you wish had stayed on in the film that's now being cut out?
Oh, there's plenty. But again, what's beautiful about this initiative, I think all the footage is going into the archive and it's part of a cultural record. So there's plenty of scenes that I hope will resurface. In Uganda, the bark cloth maker, we filmed an entire process of from cutting the tree to actually making this fabric. And so I love that series, and it didn't make it into the cut, but it's there. So yeah, I think the Met has plenty of footage to play with.
And maybe for Siaka, as a rock art specialist, at the Met now, we have these films. And is there something that you wish was there within the Met in the exhibition with respect to rock art?
Don't hurt my feelings.
I think they're beautifully done. I think, I really enjoyed watching all the films. And I think one of the things that is really special about them is that you can actually pick up threads that run through these different, representations of cultures, different cultures of Africa, different periods. Different places. For example, the idea of the spirit realm and the presence of the other side in today's living. That is very special. To see. It's not sort of in your face, but you sense it. When you listen to people speak, that there's actually something that's really lacking or lacking in the background nearby. And in Africa, that's a very, very potent realm. So to me, I think they are really very good. And it's connections as well. So apart from spirituality, there's something that speaks to us as human all over the world. I think you can take those threads beyond Africa and connect them with other parts of the world and really see what it means to be human. We're all sort of, there is an element of, affect in the way we respond to the environment we live in. We respond to it more or less in similar ways, which says something about our common humanity, despite being dispersed in all the continents.
Yeah, this morning when speeches were made somewhere about the Met, and I think someone said, the Met has this history of about 5,000 years of human history. I said, no, with rock art there, we're going back now to 80,000 years. Thank you. Over to you.
And so, well, I mean, not wanting to stray too much into this, but then that seems to me to be the value of somewhere like the Met, is that we can understand our common humanity. There's more that joins us together that separates us. And I think if you walk around the galleries and you see people absorbed in the artworks, I think that it's written on their faces, that kind of awe that people who they know nothing about from so far away can produce such beautiful pieces. So, okay, we're going to have to wrap up now, but I just wanted to ask, so Jonathan, about the future. I mean, maybe this is a downer, but I mean, I mean, what do you see in the future? Is the architecture of Kasubi tombs going to survive?
I think at this point I would like to actually thank the Met and the World Monument Fund for what you did, because the Kasubi tomb structure, I think in width, is about maybe from here to that wall. And I mean, it's not big, but it has taken us 15 years to build. And the reason is there was nothing on record that we could refer to rebuild it. So I've spent almost half my 15 years, no. I've spent a long time of my life, a big part of my life, professional life, looking for information and preparing new documentation as a record for those who come after when I'm not here anymore, that if anything happens, they can just go to the films, they can come to the Met or wherever. I'm writing a book as well. I'm not advertising that, but just as a point, that there will be a starting point of reconstruction. So the future, I think, in terms of Kasubi tombs, for instance, is really bright, and I really applaud the vision from the Met and the World Monument Fund for doing this. And I think my people too are very, 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 very happy about this. Thank you.
Fasil?
Yes. I think imagine how you can explain or understand for an audience who's out of the context to understand these places that we are talking about. If it was not for film as an art form, I mean, it combines different art, sound, visual things, the people you see this. So it gives you a better understanding than just taking a photograph or maybe even a model. So this is, I think, from a curatorial point of view, a very good and very important decision that you have made. And talking about Susanna, I want to say something. You know, when she came to my office, she said, well, Monuments Fund, mate, and so I heard these things, but when I saw such a young film director, I was...
not that young.
She was, pardon?
I'm not that young.
No,
Thank you.
No, I mean, young lady. I was... well, the way she was asking the questions was very friendly, and it kind of makes you open up and get, not so formal as such, so you let things go. And then when I saw the film, I was deeply impressed with what I saw. Not only about the film she did on Ethiopia, but when I saw all the other films, you learn about the various African cultures. And that I want to really commend you. Thank you.
So thank you, Fasil. So on that beautiful note, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for coming and listening. Please do go and see the films, or go and see. You can see them online is the best way of viewing them probably at this point. So Senna and I are going to continue to work to try and have a screening on a big screen somewhere. Please. Yeah. And I hope that you've taken away something of interest from this session about the beautiful, wonderful, great continent of Africa. Thank you very much indeed.